The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Alejandro Giamattei Fella, President of the Republic of Guatemala. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Alejandro Giamattei Fella, President of the Republic of Guatemala, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Excelentísimos.
Excellencies, President of the General Assembly, Secretary General of the United Nations Organization, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, ministers for foreign affairs, honorable delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to express my gratitude for the work of the President of the 77th session. I also wish to congratulate the President of this session, Mr. Denis Francis. I commend him for choosing the theme he's chosen for this session. That touches on the need to rebuild trust between nations and to address threats to peace, prosperity, and progress of the peoples of the United Nations. Today, we stand at an unprecedented moment in time. For more than a year and a half, we have watched in horror the war launched by the Russian Federation against Ukraine play out. That war violates the most fundamental principles on which the international order was built following the Second World War. Delegates. And you know what is even worse still? That it would seem that we've got used to that war, and we've got used to the following: to flagrant violations of human rights in Ukraine, to war, to death. Worse yet, instead of tackling all of the above, we've got used to turning a blind eye in the face of a tragic and harsh reality that we pretend to ignore. All of this has led to mistrust between human beings, to inequality between nations, to non-compliance with peace agreements, and under these circumstances, prosperity and progress of humankind is impossible. Today, here, before you all, I declare that this organization is not particularly active. We have food insecurity, people are killed by war, there are major migratory flows, and these count among other myriad problems. Consequently, we need to make this organization work. We need to work together to do that. We need a revitalized organization which seeks out solutions. But above all, we need countries that are prepared to look beyond their ideological positions, countries that are prepared to overcome age-old conflicts. Now is the time that the human beings represented among your people, now is the time for them to shake hands. Now is the time for them to be ready to share their wealth and to invest in countries that need that investment to generate wealth to survive. It is a matter of saving the very human race. It's a matter of saving the planet. It's a matter of having future generations that will be able to live in peace and development. A case in point would be here the vast flows of human beings fleeing crises in their countries. They're fleeing as a result of insecurity, a lack of food, or due to economic hardship. Consequently, under this new order that we need to usher in, we have to build a United Nations striving for peace and human development. We must demand adherence to international law. We must demand respect for the principle of the peaceful resolution of disputes, and we must demand the respect of the self-determinations of peoples. In order for these goals to be achieved, every country must raise its voice. Every country needs to say enough is enough. And today, my country adds its voice to those crying out to say enough is enough. My country is adding its voice to the global call for the immediate withdrawal of Russian forces, for the respect to the territorial integrity and unity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Slava Ukraini. Mr. President, disarmament and the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, as well as the use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, is one of the most important pillars of this organization. As a state party to the Tlatelolco Treaty, to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT, and to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, my country is deeply committed to the common goal of achieving a world free of weapons of mass destruction. Imagine what a catastrophe it would be for the world if the illegal and unprovoked aggression of the Russian Federation were to destroy the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. That is the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, and currently its integrity and proper functioning are at risk, and that could cause a disaster of immeasurable proportions. For this reason, I reiterate Guatemala's position as a country that adheres to the principle of the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. I demand that all nuclear weapon states, including the five permanent members of the Council responsible for handling peace and security within this organization, I ask them to sit down and, through candid discussion, achieve total nuclear disarmament throughout the world. Mr. President, Guatemala contributes to the maintenance of international security through its active participation in peacekeeping operations. As a staunch advocate for peace, Guatemala has committed to the United Nations by deploying Guatemalan officials in PKOs. We are the TCC, which contributes the fourth largest number of troops to these operations across the Americas. Mr. President, we reiterate our staunch commitment to and solidarity with the development and prosperity of the Haitian people. That people is on the brink as a result of a multi-dimensional crisis. That is a crisis of politics, of internal security, of development, and a humanitarian crisis. As an international community, we must react and tackle the prevailing disasters before they become even more devastating. Consequently, if this organization decides that a new peace mission is to be deployed on Haitian territory, it can count on the participation of Guatemala. We will help to train and build the capacity of Haitian forces for as long as that peacekeeping mission remains in the country. Mr. President, there is a project afoot to change the very foundations of the United Nations so that it can have the mechanisms that make it possible for it to rise to the challenges facing humankind that is so in need of peace and development. Guatemala calls upon this community of states to rapidly move forward with a proposal drafted under the aegis of country-level experts. That proposal should define the substantive reforms necessary in the United Nations so that it can return to the commendable path it embarked upon following its foundation in 1945. Over the years, we have strayed too far from that path. I would propose that without delay, we undertake a fourth amendment to our founding charter. These amendments must ensure that it adopts a new approach, that it is in sync with our current times. Of course, these are difficult times, but that ours is an era which brings with it major opportunities. When making these amendments, we must ensure proper recognition for the sovereign equality of states. That must be a reality. The resolution of conflicts between countries via peaceful means must be an obligation. Nuclear energy must be used exclusively with peaceful purposes. But perhaps the most important of all is that when amending this charter, the members of the United Nations exclude no one. As our holy book, Popol Vuh, states, it is the holy book of one of the greatest civilizations of the world, the Maya civilization. It states, no one must stay behind, everyone must rise up. Today I wish to say to you that I am the leader of a founding nation of the United Nations. As such, I recognize that the transformation of this body will prompt a radical shift in multilateralism. That new multilateralism must recognize the importance of inclusion and the universality of this organization. How can it be that in the midst of the 21st century, this organization keeps a country like Taiwan outside its doors? That country is one which contributes to science, high technology, healthcare, development, and many other fields. But what's most significant is that we have kept the Taiwanese citizens from having a voice that represented in this organization. Guatemala exhorts the United Nations to use any and all means necessary to guarantee international peace and security on the Taiwan Strait. Moreover, we condemn the constant and ever-increasing military maneuvers seen in the waters and airspace around Taiwan. These maneuvers imperil security in the region and affect international transport and trade. Mr. President, 4 years ago, I took office as the President of the Republic of Guatemala, and over that time, I have heard great speeches made. I have seen great treaties signed and great commitments made to halt climate change. I want to say to you all today that the world is in a worse state than it was 4 years ago because more than speeches, commitments, and treaties, what the world needs is action. The region that suffers most the ravages of climate change is the Caribbean and the Central American region, and that is true despite the fact that we produce an infinitesimal percentage of global greenhouse gases. And in spite of that fact, we are the ones that suffer the most damage year on year. Our resources are being depleted and we must get into debt to rebuild countries which next year are simply damaged once more. This prompts us to take out loans from international sources, which are only too happy to grant them. But these are organizations which live off immorally high interest rates. However, the reports issued by United Nations rapporteurs talk about the scant development of our peoples. They point it out to us and they criticize us. But who is pointing the finger at those who, following their industrialization and as a result of their paltry commitment to tackling the effects of climate change and greenhouse gases, cause the death of human beings throughout the world? There are countries that neither accept UN agreements on climate change nor pay their contributions to the climate budget. These nations, neither do these nations take responsibility for the toxic pollution of their industries and far less for the destruction that these industries cause. Is that fair? Mr. President, the serious threat posed by the consumption of drugs, particularly synthetic drugs, must be a source of grave concern to the international community. These drugs represent an invisible enemy that is affecting health and that is also undermining governance and hampering development in various countries. This organization must alter the way in which it broaches this issue. As part of this shift, countries must understand that transnational crime must be fought transnationally because it is a fact that the major consuming countries are the chief culprits of money laundering. They launder the money that is made from drugs, and that means that this fight is a global responsibility. We have to put an end to this scourge. The fight against drug trafficking, including against synthetic drugs, must be a joint one and a coordinated one. Information as part of this fight must flow in accordance with applicable domestic and international legislation. It is necessary to implement effective strategies to tackle the criminal organizations responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people every year. A world free of drugs will not be achieved without a world committed to fighting against them. Mr. President, Guatemala is unstintingly committed to promoting food security and to fulfilling the zero hunger goal, which is part of Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. In this spirit, we have increased our budget for feeding our citizens and we have strengthened our school feeding law. The goal of that law is to guarantee the feeding of girls, boys, and teenagers of school age in a sustainable fashion, and the ultimate goal of that action is to guarantee that these groups have a dignified, healthy, and active life. I am proud to inform you that in 2022, these efforts benefited 2.6 million students in public education establishments. Guatemala also notes with alarm that there has been the suspension of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. We underscore at this juncture the risks that non-renewal poses for food security across the world. It hampers humanitarian operations which themselves contribute to alleviating hunger at a global level, and its non-renewal destabilizes food prices. We condemn the use of hunger as a weapon of war. Doing that is a violation of human rights and of international humanitarian law. We call for reason to prevail. We call for cooperation, and we call upon all to avoid a further worsening of the global food situation. Mr. President, a topic which seemed to not be particularly important, but which should have been treated as pivotal within a revitalized organization, is cultural heritage. Because the mosaic of cultural diversity of our world is under threat, that threat is particularly acute in times of war. We must strengthen and safeguard the evidence of our past. Having that evidence is vital to understand our present and to build our future. In Guatemala, we worked arduously to implement the principle of caring for our heritage and to display our heritage and our millennia-old cultural richness to the world. It was deeply satisfactory and a source of great pride to see our celebration of Holy Week declared as an intangible heritage of humanity. Moreover, I wish to share with you that yesterday the archaeological park Tacarga Abad was declared a global heritage of humankind, and that is considered to be the first city in which the Mayan civilization was born. As an old refrain goes, he who knows not his past does not have a safe future guaranteed. Mr. President, Guatemala has long distinguished itself as a country calling for the respect of the peaceful coexistence and the coexistence of international law and the respect of sovereignty as two principles. We've demonstrated that with deeds, and it's been demonstrated that we can settle differences via international justice bodies, and that's the case with our territorial maritime and land dispute with Belize. Both countries are committed to resolving that peacefully and respectively in line with any decision made by the ICJ. Dear friends, the goodwill between parties has been shown clearly between Belize and Guatemala, and that's an example of how you can peacefully resolve a dispute via international justice. And that pathway stands in stark contrast to international war brought about by the foolishness of human beings. Mr. President, Guatemala recognizes that one of the gravest and most alarming threats to life and freedom in our times is human trafficking. That is not only a despicable practice which violates human rights, but it's a real crime against humanity, one which violates the most fundamental values that we cling to as a community of nations. The trafficking in persons is a crime linked to slavery, bearing in mind that trafficking involves the buying and selling of human beings that should be able to live in freedom as part of a fundamental right to life. Consequently, in absolutely unequivocal terms, my country condemns this crime, and in this spirit, we've adopted a series of legal and political measures to suppress that phenomenon. We have a public policy in place against the violent exploitation and trafficking in persons that harmonizes and enhances state-level action to guarantee the protection of the victims of trafficking in persons as well as their comprehensive care. Moreover, our laws promote the prevention, detection, prosecution, and punishment of those responsible for this abhorrent crime. In this same vein, we have a policy for the comprehensive protection of children and adolescents. That policy is focused on guaranteeing the holistic development of girls, boys, and adolescents and ensuring that development is inclusive and equitable. That policy was adopted in 2022, and it now is an umbrella for 90 programs within the executive that aim to ensure development for the human being from cradle to grave. Through these various initiatives, Guatemala is seeking to distinguish itself as a leader in the fight against trafficking in persons. We have made this our priority. It's a scourge that we want to halt, to bring in human dignity, because the numbers of persons trafficked are on the rise. I must remind you that the gross profit made by trafficking in persons exceeds the profit made by the international arms trade, and soon these profits will surpass those garnered by the illicit drug trade. Children are snatched from their homes, they're handed over to gangs that prostitute them, and then, once they've ceased to be fresh meat for those criminals, they are butchered and their organs are sold for transplants. We cannot remain indifferent and passive in the face of these horrific crimes. Mr. President, this is my last speech before this General Assembly as a head of state. And contrary to the supposed truths we've heard from this podium today, I will hand over power to the person who was elected as a result of, who will be elected in the elections on the 14th of January. The elections we've already seen were rooted in unnecessary international involvement. That involvement and interference was unnecessary because our democracy is not perfect, but it has been a democracy which has allowed us to have the peaceful handover of power and respect of the Constitution. And we have a continent where some presidents fight to stay and cling to their jobs, and they allow re-elections which go against their own constitutions, but we have remained faithful to our constitution and the principle of democratic handover every 4 years. And I now wish to conclude. The United Nations is facing the greatest challenges of its time. We have challenges in front of it which require us to be strong. We need to remain united. We need to be ready for action. Global peace was something we took for granted for years, but now there needs to be a major international covenant, a covenant which moves beyond differences, goes beyond colours, which does not, which goes beyond countries and national borders. This covenant needs to place human beings at its heart. Citizens need to be the front runners. People and protecting them should be our ultimate goal. We need to halt wars. That seems a pipe dream today. Today, we have a major imperative to heed. But whatever you may believe, let us fight for peace. Wherever you may be, let us fight for peace. Whatever your situation, let us fight for peace. If we don't do that, we'll one day wake up and we'll have been invaded or killed by others. That's why we must stand united. We must strive so that one day we can, as citizens of the world, wake up in a climate of peace, progress, and development. I thank you.
A nombre de la Asamblea.
On behalf of the Assembly, I thank the President of the Republic of Guatemala for the address just delivered, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency.
La Asamblea escucha.
The Assembly will now hear an address by Her Excellency Katalin Novak, President of Hungary. I request protocol to escort Her Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honour to welcome Her Excellency Katalin Novak, President of Hungary, and I invite her to address the Assembly.
Of the people, by the people, for the people. We all know the most famous words of the Gettysburg Address. However, fewer people know that Abraham Lincoln borrowed these words from one of the greatest Hungarians, Lajos Kossuth, the leader of our 1848 War of Independence, who was born on this very day, the 19th of September. Dear President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all for the people and all by the people. Nothing about the people without the people. This is the main purpose of the sovereign Hungarian state and the guarantee of our freedom. The Hungarian people want peace and security. We have 1,000 years of turbulent history in the heart of Europe, in the drowsy Carpathian Basin, with wars, oppression and occupation, revolutions and wars of independence. We know the feeling of vulnerability. We know what it is like to live divided and what suffering wars cause. We know how precious freedom is and how painful it is to be deprived of it. I myself was born during the decades of Soviet oppression, when my country was not free. A childhood spent in a softening communist dictatorship left indelible marks on my generation. The rejection of any kind of oppression has become an instinct in us. That is why we condemn clearly and unequivocally the violation of international law, the attack on another state, the Russian aggression against Ukraine, which has caused immense suffering and destruction and has destroyed the peaceful life of Europe. We are for the victims and against further escalation. This is why we are providing humanitarian aid to Ukraine and to all those fleeing the war. We help beyond our size and strength. This is why we emphasize that there are 150,000 Hungarians living in Ukraine, in Transcarpathia, who share every hardship and struggle, sacrifice and success. This war also directly affects us Hungarians. It is not just in our neighborhood. Hungarian fathers and sons living in Ukraine are also giving their lives in the trenches. Thus, we want peace in our country, in Ukraine, in Europe, in the world. Peace and the security that comes with it. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Hungary stands for the territorial integrity and independence of Ukraine. We understand Ukraine's desire to be part of the community of European countries. Thus, we expect it to uphold the values that characterize our community, including expressly the protection and full guarantee of the rights of national minorities. Not in words, in deeds. At the invitation of President Zelensky, I have been to Kiev twice since the outbreak of the war. I have seen the suffering of the families. I have seen what they experience when the peace is broken. I have met Ukrainian and Hungarian people who have lost family members. I have met Ukrainian children for whom the kindergarten was set up with the help and support of Hungary. Children from whom the war is depriving a happy childhood. The war and the suffering affects families first and foremost. Mothers who lose their husbands and sons. Fathers who go into battle with their barely grown-up sons. Children who lose their sense of security and faith in the future. There is no alternative to peace. The killing, the terrible destruction must stop as soon as possible. War is never the solution. We know that peace is only realistically attainable when at least one side sees the time for negotiations as having come. We cannot decide for Ukrainians about how much they are prepared to sacrifice, but we have a duty to represent our own nation's desire for peace. And we must do all we can to avoid an escalation of the war. I'm a mother of 3 children, and we mothers know in every war, children are the most vulnerable. War hits them the hardest. Although they are the ones who need security and stability the most. These are lost in war. Hungary has always been respectful towards other nations. We are loyal to our allies and our partners alike. Proud and active members of the United Nations, NATO, the European Union, and the Council of Europe. We do our share of the joint tasks, even beyond our size and economic weights. As an equestrian nation, we speak honestly with a straight posture. Here we are at the UN in New York, heads of state and governments, world leaders. We have come together as we do every year. In the United Nations, created by our ancestors' desire for peace, demand a ceasefire and a just peace. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, of the people, by the people, for the people. I would also like to take this opportunity to send a message to the world from young Hungarians. I have asked our youth delegates, the youth delegate of Hungary to the United Nations, Csenge Offenbacher, who is here with us today to help us articulate the message of Hungarian youth. This is the sentence they gave me. Today, we need solidarity with each other more than ever. So young people feel that we must look out for each other, that we must not let go the hands of others reaching out towards us. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this spring in Hungary, Budapest, in the nation's main square, the square named after the aforementioned Lajos Kossuth, Pope Francis prayed in the presence of tens of thousands of people with the following words. Pour into the hearts of the leaders of men and of peoples the desire to build peace, to offer to future generations a future of hope, not war, a future of cradles, not graves. The 5th Budapest Demographic Summit, the most important international forum on demographic issues, was concluded 3 days ago. A large part of the world is facing, in addition to war, a difficulty that is oppressing it from within. In Europe, and in many of your countries, the demographic winter has turned into an ice age. Public leaders, thinkers, demographers, and representatives of family organizations and professional workshops from 60 countries and 5 continents sought answers on how to protect and strengthen families and how to overcome our demographic difficulties. If we do not address this issue, it will have an immeasurable impact on our economies, societies, and security in the near future. Elon Musk may be right when he says that demographic decline is a more serious problem than the climate crisis. Little attention is paid to the real and irreversible change of the world. If there is no child, there is no future. What is the point of looking after the earth if we don't have